Pirate Kings, Pirate Queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea. We're gonna keep on going. It's time for number 3 of our countdown to OP06. Man, I have not gone this hard on recording and editing in this short a time in a while. Man, I just need to make sure I'm still sleeping, still eating. Did you have breakfast today? I usually go for eggs, cottage cheese, but I'm kind of in the mood for bagels. No, I'm not worried about health right now. Let's get into some donuts. If you're just joining, this video is part of a series I'm doing for the week leading up to the release of OP06, where I'll be going over the top decks of the format according to the data I was able to find about the results in Asia. If you're enjoying these videos or find them helpful, feel free to leave a like, and if you want to see more, support the channel, and get notified as soon as the next part in the series drops, go ahead and subscribe. In case you're a new viewer, here is a quick rundown of my process for these videos. I put every single deck list from One Piece top decks and second storage into a spreadsheet, weighted each entry according to the tournament's level of competition, the list's placement in that tournament, and how far into the format that tournament took place, to come up with a point system that let me arrange the decks into tiers, as well as an algorithm to put together a typical winning deck list weighted to the conditions that I just mentioned. You'll also see helpful stats about a deck's cost curve, the amount of 2K counters, non-counters, blockers, events, and other relevant figures, so take a look and enjoy as we get into the next deck in our countdown to OP06. Running through the meta wheel here, we have Reiju at number 7, Perona at 6, Enel at 5, Yamato at 4, and our number 3 deck is an old favorite all the way back from set 3, Katakuri. 3 yellow decks in a row, and this will be our final installment of the color. It took Katakuri a little bit of time to really pick up steam on OP06's release, and the starting environment was a perfect storm for him to fly under the radar. With Sakazuki being so dominant in OP05 and receiving more support in set 6, anyone trying to counter it had to find ways to get multiple characters out in one turn, especially Gecko Moria, another new leader released in set 6. And with the way Katakuri is built and tends to play, he can have a pretty hard time dealing with 5k after 5k after 5k. This new spread of go-wide strategies, especially Moria, brought Katakuri to the point that a fair amount of lists were cutting 10-mom down to 3, since there'd be a significant number of games that would end before she could even hit the board. At the same time, since he's such a generic leader with a strong ability, he's able to use the new tools that Yellow got in set 6 just as well as the rest of them. Pudding will still be his go-to turn 1 play, but with all these new good Yellow cards that don't have Big Mom or Sky Island in a generically good leader, this runs the risk of her whiffing more often. But with 20 targets in the data list, we still have just shy of a 90% chance for hitting on the first turn, so our odds are still good. Onami can give us a good shot at banishing our opponent's life, or ripping some counter out of hand at the very least, especially if we don't have an on-curve play, or if we see something we really don't like on top of our opponent's life. But she's mainly here for the same reason she's in an L. She's a Thunderbolt trigger, and she has counter. Perospero ends up with the same situation that Pudding has, but there's an argument that can be made that he's here at this point because he comes out early game or off of trigger, rather than the effect itself. The Surge is still good, and it helps his case for being included, but it's not his main point, and we're not as worried about the Surge whiffing, or as easily willing to let him get KO'd. Capone Gang Beige is still Yellow's best trigger. You can put him right at the bottom with the leader effect, but he can still have value as a 2k counter if you draw him off your life at a time when the trigger won't help. This is probably just confirmation bias, but I feel like there are so many games where I decide to take the first life and get over my initial habit of countering early. Like 80% of the time, it's a beige. It's just going to be a beige. So at this point, don't necessarily do this. This might not be good. I'm not letting that first life in unless I see it. Unless I know it's not a trigger I need at the bottom. Amande is a searchable 2k counter that can discard a trigger to rest at 2 cost. 2 isn't the most relevant, but if you run into chump blockers in decks like Fortress Yamato or Perona, she could clear them for you. 4-cost blocker Sanji is making his first appearance in these videos. He did see play in Katakuri, but you're not going to be blocking with him as much as he used to because of all the shenanigans we have with Amaru or any black deck. But he comes out on trigger and swings for 5k, so at this point for Katakuri, the more attackers the better. If you've been watching so far, you know that Kiku Nojo's A+ in my book. Easily swinging 7k with our leader is going to make her effect live a little easier than it is in an L. Not quite as easy as Yamato, but it's not unreasonable to expect. A decent amount of lists did swap either her or Sanji out for Cracker as time went on in the format, especially as Yellow ended up gaining more presence as time went on. Gidatsu's our best shot against Kuzan in black, or to cut down on Moriya's aggression since he can KO any of those Thriller Bar characters when life is at 4, and running both him and Kikunojo together gives you a couple options on turn 3 versus Sakazuki, depending on what they play. If you don't attack Sakazuki in the first couple turns, they might just play their 4-cost Borsellino to avoid the Gidatsu, and you can play the Kikunojo down to have a 6k swinger in, but there's a chance that they will either be able to Hound Blazer or KO her without the effect being active since they have the Borsellino to block your life swing. In fact, we're probably going to be seeing Kuzan played on 6 or 7 a lot more often now. But even if Gidatsu doesn't get to KO something, a 5-cost 6k is a great stat line right now since it's a little tougher to get off the board, or at least makes these control decks use more resources to get him off the board that they won't have later on in the game. Satori is our usual staple for yellow. 5-cost 2k counter with 5k power on trigger is good. And here's the part that really took me for a loop. 4 7-cost Linlin. If you've seen the NL video, this might not surprise you. But 94.29, I've got to make sure I'm exact, got to be specific with the data, of these reported lists played her at 4, and the others only cut 1 copy. Of course, she will be best turn 4 when you can play her on curve, but a lot of the time, Katakuri is spending the early parts of the game swinging into life to try and close out fast, since he might not get to Tendon otherwise. So to that end, we're going to be going first more often than not. Some matchups might still want us to go second. And if you win that die roll, you can play 1 7-cost Linlin on 7 and another one on 9. If you're putting this pressure up, wearing them down, then they'll give you the life, and that might let you live long enough to get to those 10 mom chains. But if they trash that life, you are one step closer to the lethal combo. There's a good chance you've noticed that we don't have any of the 8-cost Katakuri in this deck, and he very much fell by the wayside during set 6. But since the English format is an extension of the Asian format, there's a chance that 1 or 2 copies could have merit for Fortress Yamato, or any of these black decks running the 8-cost Moriya, and for the Mirror as well. And 10-cost Big Mom needs no introduction. Man, people really want to see her go, but she is still in the format. At least in Japan post April 1st. Who knows what's going to happen over here. Again, a fair amount did cut her down to 3, but that's not a her problem. Healing 1 and banishing 1 isn't suddenly bad, it's just the other decks sometimes make it so she can't be used as often. I've been running her at 4 in my testing, but cutting her down is something I want to experiment with. Maybe a copy of You're the One Who Should Disappear if you find yourself unhappy with the amount of counter or the amount of non-counter cards, but sky's the limit here. And then we get to the ultimate ungodly wombo combo of 200 million volts Amaro and Reject. I'll keep it relatively brief since I did discuss this in the Anil video. But if your opponent is relying on blockers to stay in the game, they might try to keep you at 2 life so that you can't use Amaru's effect when you're at 1 and rest one of their 4-cost characters. Reject solves this problem in the way that Thunderbolt has previously, by getting rid of 1 of your life, but instead of trashing that life, it goes to your hand, and instead of KOing one of your opponent's 5-cost characters at the same time, it can also do that. It shouldn't. That's just its second effect that you'd have to use in a different instance. But if your opponent is on their last life, that life goes to their hand. So you either KO the blockers that Amaru can't reach, but if you time it right, you facilitate Amaru in the first place and deal the last damage. As toxic or annoying, people will have different feelings on this, as this strategy is, it does open Katakuri up to a slightly more adaptable and opportunistic playstyle. He can diverge into one of 2 paths depending on the decisions your opponent makes and the individual circumstance of a given turn. But something I've had to learn is not to get too tunnel visioned on either avenue too much. Sometimes you might need to pivot from one to the other. Reject may or may not be banned during OP06 when it comes our way. We don't have details on that yet, but it's insane either way. And EBO1's going to give us another way to draw from life, so we'll have a similar, slightly less powerful, but similar strategy to work with as time goes on. And what do you know, it is frequency and card count time, and I swear this was an accident. This was not intentional. This is just the cards we put in the algorithm list, but we got a nice baker's dozen over here. I sincerely apologize to anyone who doesn't actually watch or read One Piece and has no idea why I'm mentioning donuts so much here. But I'm also jealous of you because you get to read Whole Cake for the first time. Beige is always around 100%. No surprise there. 7-cost Linlin is astoundingly popular, as we talked about. Tenmon played by everybody. 57.14% at 4 copies, the other 42.86% at 3. Then Pudding and Perospero were a little less popular than the Gidatsu and Amaru. Reject, Onami, Sanji, Satori, and Amande were all over 75%, or just around there in Amande's case. And Kikunojo was a bit polarizing, a little under 50%, but I think it's just the high-achieving lists having her that pushed her through the algorithm. Then we have our potential inclusions, Charlotte Cracker if you want to change up the 4 costs, the Katakuri Secret Rare. I haven't tested it in OP06, but I do plan to. You're the One Who Should Disappear, gives us a little more defense, gets rid of those counterless cards. Thunderbolt, some people wanted a mix of that and Reject, and also to have her on trigger. I think we're fine with Onami. Strusen's another 2K option. He'll probably end up seeing more play if Sakazuki gets banned before set 7 and we get stuff like Law back or Zoro, or even if Zoro has a surprise weekend like he did in set 5 over here. Hiyori's nice, but might not be the most necessary given all the trigger shenanigans we have with our leader ability. Brule blocks, and we'll finally get this 4-cost Zoro promo that Japan's had since set 5, but I think he's already been power crept, honestly. Sure, Hoshi's a nice utility card, but at this point we are focused on establishing bodies with our triggers. And this one's pretty interesting. The Edward Newgate from Star Deck 13, which we'll be getting, I think, a month into the format. He's a 6-drop 7k. On play, you can add the top card of your deck to the top of your life cards, then look at all of your life cards, place one on top of your deck, and return the remaining life in any desired order. He does fill out our curve if we're going second. 7,000's a great number to hit naturally. And it's pretty cool that we can essentially roadmap our life, start focusing on avoiding our opponent's triggers as time goes on, or still do some rearranging of our own life if the game starts going in a different direction than we anticipated. El Thor's the Yellow Radical Beam. Probably be live pretty often with all the aggression we try and put out, but we really want to use our Doan for that aggression. Then Omen Holy, they are extra bodies. No trigger though, and we're not really running Shura to search either of them out. And every now and then we saw the 7 drop in now. I think he could be kind of cheeky, kind of cool if you're not drinking the 4 copies of 7 Linlin Kool-Aid, but that 95%, that's looking pretty good. I don't think I'm gonna mess with that. With the nature of yellow being the trigger color, and the way that Katakuri has built himself over time, this deck has a reputation as a high-rolly, brain-dead, trigger-happy, just curve-out sort of deck, which I've always taken a teeny bit of issue with. I'm not saying that it's completely misinformed, I just think it's a little more nuanced than that. But as time went on in the Asian format, players did realize that it was going to take more skill to succeed with Katakuri than it would have before. It's really important to see the pathway to your checkmate scenario, know if you need to starve your opponent or put the aggression out. The mulligan is more important and more subtle, and even though we're focusing very highly on the triggers, the question of whether we should be pulling a trigger off in the moment or letting it go to our hand is also a very big question. Of course, lots of these were already factors to playing Katakuri well in the first place, but mistakes on any of these fronts are much more punishing in set 6 than they had been before. Katakuri is one of those decks that has a decent track record standing up to Sakazuki, and as Sakazuki got more popular in the Asian format, Katakuri followed suit to match it. He's going to be around for a long time because this ability is just so generic and so good. And the thing I really love about this list that the data gave me, and as I'm sure anyone who has the deck from last format will agree with, this is going to be pretty cheap to upgrade. We don't need Hiyori or Momonosuke. Those Wano super rares don't have to be in here. Out of any deck I'm talking about in these videos, when it comes to just the new cards from set 6, this is the cheapest one by a mile, and it's still powerful. For those reasons, and because I just think the deck is fun, and there's more room to learn with it than there ever was before, I'm going to, for at least a little while, be maining Katakuri in set 6. And that's number 3, we are officially in Tier 1 territory. I hope you've enjoyed this one. It might have been a little more unhinged than those first 4. Yeah, there's probably no correlation. I'll be fine, because I'm just too excited to share this data with all of you. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you have your own thoughts about Katakuri's place in the meta and how to best build him for set 6, let me know in the comments. And if you want to support the channel or find out as soon as the next video comes out, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I am going to go find the nearest place that sells French crawlers at 10:30 p.m., and I will see you for the next one.